Hey everyone, Conor from Force Intelligence yet again, and today's topic is going to be the factors that affect your training volume. So for starters, I should mention that any sort of volume you do is always going to be relative to your goal. How you look about things, etc. But understand for any goal, there's going to be something which Mike has discussed quite well, called your minimum effective dose and your maximum recoverable volume. These are sort of two ends of the spectrum where progress starts to be made, and when you sort of get to a position where you only just making progress or even going too far. This is a rough thing that changes based upon a few factors, as we're going to discuss today. So I ran across a coach very recently. We're having a discussion. He's theoretically good knowledge. He's got good knowledge with techniques and all these things in terms of exercise technique. Fantastic. But looking upon his programs, we're talking about it, and it seems that he has the same volume sort of things and things such as sets, reps, etc. for every single person he comes across. So the rationale there was, look, no matter where you are in your training career, if you're trying to develop strength hypertrophy, you should be doing roughly the same thing. And there is a little bit of truth to that. However, although the goal may be the same, what are the necessary procedures to get you there might adjust a bit. Might be the same overall philosophy of things such as get you stronger, eating caloric surplus, etc. Things like that, for example. But what that looks like is obviously going to be relative to the individual. The first thing I'm going to discuss with volume, so just very quickly actually, we're going to define volume as is discussed in research, which is sets times reps times weight. You can almost do relative intensity there, absolute intensity times distance. So how far it's moving. That's going to be the factor that's going to equate to your tonnage volume. Okay. So the first thing which you don't go to this video straight away. It's something that you need to know as a coach / even a trainer yourself is life stress. So I call the volume bucket for that video. Basically, the more life stress you have, the lower that maximum recoverable volume will be. Honestly, this is the first thing I actually look at in terms of discussing how much I can actually do with people in the gym. The next thing is going to be your relative intensity. So relative intensity is basically how hard you're pushing it for you in terms of effort. So the harder you push sets, so as the reps in reserve get lower and lower, the closer you approach to failure, the less overall sets you need, because with that sort of stimulus in place, you need basically less of it to get there. There's more effective reps done a lot quicker than across just one or two across sets after sets after sets. The next thing is absolute intensity. So if you're doing something that, let's say with a few examples, you had someone, again, we'll have relative intensity equated, someone doing, let's say 3 reps in reserve of 30% of 1 RM, 70% of 1 RM, and 90% of 1 RM. Maybe that's doing singles last stage. There seems to be a sweet point with what is beneficial for hypertrophy. And again, the law of specificity applies. If you're trying to do strength, you obviously need to sort of hit those thresholds a bit higher. However, for hypertrophy, there is sort of a sweet ground. So what I mean by that is if you're just trying to chase failure or a certain place away from failure with these 3 methods, the first one is going to carry along a whole bunch of junk reps, junk fatigue, such as 30% of 1 RM. You're probably just doing reps as chasing failure until you actually get there. Towards the top, yes, you do get that sort of mechanical tension straight away. You're sort of getting a few things that are very conducive to growth. However, there seems to be more of a systemic toll with these sort of things. A little bit bro science here, that one, but something you do see in experience. The next thing, which I think is very important that people overlook, is absolute strength. So how strong you are as an individual. I don't really care if this equates to if you're 200 kilos, 100 kilos, boy, girl, doesn't matter for me. How strong you are in absolute really does matter. The stronger you get throughout your training career, the more overload you're sort of having in itself each set. So suddenly someone's 80% of 1 RM could be 100 kilos. For another person, it could be 250. So for the 250 group, yes, your sort of recovery resources may have adapted, and a few things have adapted to make you good at 250 kilos, but there's a few things that sort of have a toll across the whole body. The next thing I want to discuss is previous phases. So with sort of the first thing I'll talk about is if you come into a phase in trying to decide how much volume you've done, one thing to consider is how much volume you've done in previous phases. So one possible thing that might come up, let's say you've done multiple hypertrophy or metabolic or just overall like high volume things, you're going to be carrying in a fair bit of fatigue if you come into that another phase of that. Even if you deload, there seems to be some lingering fatigue. It's sort of like if you came across a maintenance phase and came back in, A, the volume you could get away with goes lower, but B, there's going to be no lingering fatigue. So your maximum recoverable volume actually goes up. The next thing is sort of the sensitivity for the stimulus. Now this could almost be rephrased your trainability. So let's say there's a threshold with like each certain kind of stimulus. You can almost break this down into like, honestly, a bunch of different ways. You could say like more neural hypertrophy, metabolic. You could say like, I don't know, mechanical tension, metabolic stress, muscle damage. Although there's going to be like blurring lines with these sort of things, if you've been beating upon one pathway over and over and over and over, the amount you need to do to get a response to that is obviously going to be more as the law of overload versus, okay, if you haven't done it for a while, you can be quite sensitive to the stimulus. Anyone that's went through a strength phase or a deep, like a extended maintenance phase can attest that just doing a few sets of 10 on like a bench press, your pump might be just insane. Whereas the same person tries to do that after doing, maybe 4 months of hypertrophy work, 4, 5, 6 sets there, they don't get the same response there. The next thing is height. So this is something I've actually learned through experience, but actually makes quite a bit of sense. So with the volume equation, as you can see, there are sets times reps times weight times distance. So with the distance factor, this is both relative to the individual as well as against different individuals. So taller athletes, they are actually doing a higher volume of work. Let's say they equate to the same depth, as in like, let's say two people, let's say we've got Thor Bjornsson, 6'8", 400 pounds, whatever, versus someone smaller, maybe 5 foot, let's say Prantic. Sorry, buddy. Even if you have the exact same reps and weight, like across the things, Thor Bjornsson is going to be traveling further. He's going to be doing more distance. A greater volume of work is being done per individual set. So the small individuals, they don't actually move things as far. Even if they're trying to go deeper than they previously have, it's still big picture, not as far as even maybe a Thor doing just halfway down. So that's going to affect your volume right there. So shorter individuals can actually get away with more. Both their minimum effective dose and maximum recoverable volume just both sort of shifts towards a higher direction. The next thing is gender. So look, it's clear that females can recover from more volume than guys on the whole. However, there's a few caveats here. Again, if we equate like life stress, blah, 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 one thing that seems to be interesting is, and I'm actually not 1,000% sure of the answer, maybe you guys can comment below or direct me towards some research that doesn't equate for this. It seems like the biggest difference between guys and girls in terms of training volume might just simply be that absolute strength factor. So on the whole, guys are stronger than girls. Because of that, they can usually handle less volume because there's more weight done for the total work. Now, let's say for another example, we've got me and another girl that can do the same for my lifts. Let's say she's the same height, all these things equated. We just very may be able to handle the same amount of volume. We may do. That's not saying I know for sure just yet, but again, it may just tie into the absolute strength factor. The overall stronger you are, the less total things you can recover from. The next thing is calorie balance. So let's say we can compare deficit, isocaloric, and hypocaloric. So with the calorie balance, sorry, I might have fucked that up there. So deficit, maintenance, and surplus, hypercaloric. If you're in a deficit, your maximum recoverable volume in terms of how much you can recover from actually is going to go down. So you're going to be able to handle less sets per week. On the other end of the spectrum, because there's more, let's say, anti-mTOR stimulus coming in, you might actually need to increase your minimum effective dose this way. So let's say it's constant stimulus of deficit. To counteract that, to make sure you maintain tissue or even try and grow it, whatever, you need more like anabolic stimulus to come in. Now, one way we can do that is a little bit more training, a little bit more positive stimulus through there. So we've got two factors here. So let's say this is the effective volume range. In deficit, it's actually going to creep together. Maintenance, for sure your maximum recoverable volume goes up. Technically your minimum effective dose would go up, but I think maintenance phases are definitely a good chance to sort of resensitize to certain things again. So when you jump in the next phase with a surplus, you got just a gigantic bullseye that you could just get results anyway, or maybe you could periodize across sort of both ends of the spectrum. The next thing is PEDs. This seems to be a really interesting topic. Again, like the gender thing, it actually seems somewhat probable that if you jump on performance-enhancing drugs and you're training hard with your sets, you might not actually be able to handle more. It's almost like it might actually be even in the day, but there's a few factors going on. So again, absolute strength is the interesting factor. You take PEDs, your strength goes up, you deliver more of a disruption per set yet again. However, you are adding more disruption, yet at the same time, you can recover from more. And it's just my guess at the moment that for each unit of you can do more, you can recover from more. I don't think there's a surplus or deficit either way. And this is something that, it just seems so quite obvious to like the natty lifter will say, PEDs do everything, but it seems actually like, this is through working with you guys, the PEDs, as well as just hearing a lot of anecdotal observations, that it might actually be pretty even because, again, that sort of absolute strength factor. Definitely not something to be disrespected, the absolute strength. The next thing is the exercise selection. So there's a few things there. How much overall disruption is done in one exercise versus another is going to be a big factor. For example, is it sort of like you're getting a stretch under load that seems to cause a lot of damage? Is it just overall something that moves a fair distance? Again, distance is a factor here. Is it something that is systemically taxing? These are all things you need to consider. Another thing might be your strength curve. Does it just overload you in little bits and pieces throughout the rep, or is it throughout the whole movement? Again, if it's throughout the whole movement, technically high range, high threshold motor units, blah, blah, you can actually get away with less because you don't have to do another exercises to tick off other ranges or different sets of muscle fibers, etc. The next thing is phase length. So this should be somewhat obvious, but if you are doing a accumulation deload paradigm of, let's say 4 weeks, then 1 week deload versus 2 weeks, 1 week deload versus half a year, 1 week deload, there's going to be more and more fatigue. Basically, sorry, I'll rephrase that. If you're doing really long stretches of accumulation, then to make sure fatigue doesn't interfere with performance and you're not going backwards, you technically need to be a little bit more on the back pedal in terms of overload. And that's both in sets or like volume, as well as like weight. Suddenly, yes, adaptations will jump up. You can't be as aggressive because fatigue's going to get in the way and sort of mask those adaptations, potentially make you go backwards, potentially get you injured, etc. Versus, let's say you're doing a really intensive block, maybe like something like an overreaching block. You can do a shitload of volume for 2 weeks and then just have a week off to recover. In fact, you're actually starting to see that with a few studies. So again, like here's an example of how some of these things apply. Volume study, 30 to 45 sets per week. Produces more growth than I think it was like 16 to 24 versus like 8 to 10. Wow, it seems like a lot of volume. A few things, they weren't that strong. Second thing, it was only 8 weeks of study. Third thing, sort of how they defined relative intensity is a bit more murky. It's more like a technical failure. Versus another study I saw recently, only trained body parts 1 time per week, mind you, compared 5, 10, 15, and 20 sets. They pushed them balls to the wall. They were strong. And by the end of that study, you actually saw that 10 sets per week had the best growth, followed by 5, then 15, then 20. That's for both growth and strength there. So yeah, it sort of ties around. I'll sort of jump ahead to the next thing of frequency. How you sort of adjust frequency can sort of determine how much volume you can handle throughout the week. So with volume, I haven't really defined if it's per session or throughout the whole week. There's basically a few rationales you can use here. If you're looking at how much you can do per session, then obviously greater overload, greater time to recover, you have to do it less frequently. If you're trying to do things more frequently, technically less overloading, less volume on the whole. although if you sort of like do things carefully with volume, with all these things in mind to get like effective volume, technically a slightly higher frequency can allow you to do higher volume than you otherwise could if you just had 1 time per week. So one other thing with that sort of study we saw, 30, 45 sets, training 3 times a week versus 1 time for 10 as the best results in each group, is maybe there's an idea that there's effective amount per session and then you can train again soon. And that's the best way to get volume up. So frequency is an interesting one. Phase length, I think we sort of tackled that. Sleep. So again, sort of ties back to life's bucket, etc. Sleep is huge. It's going to be a gigantic factor. Basically, your recovery status is going to be greatly influenced by sleep. It's definitely your most potent time of, or potent form of recovery you can use. No active release methods, no food even, no etc, little small things, manual therapies are going to amount to the sort of fatigue reduction / recoverability of sleep. Also, your minimum effective dose, how those sort of hormones are going to be the next day if you haven't slept well. Sort of would stand to reason your minimum effective dose comes up. In fact, there's a million studies out there showing sleep is it's basically terrible for body composition and even just body weight in general. So definitely tick off sleep. The better sleep you can get, the more volume you can handle. If it's shit, don't try and out-train it. In fact, if you're overtraining already, it's going to affect sleep. If you're trying to keep digging that ditch, it's just going to get worse and worse for you. Right, next, there seems to be some research with different kinds of alleles will dictate like, okay, how much damage someone will have from a set. So let's say you're someone quickly on understanding damage. So with training, we've got like sort of a baseline. This is something that was theorized by John Meadows, but it's actually been shown in practice through some inflammatory markers, etc. Let's say here's your baseline. If you're sort of like digging a small ditch through training with a breakdown effects, etc., your recoverability is usually, if you've got a good SRAs, it's going to take you higher than you were previously. However, if you're doing too much disruption, digging yourself too deep, you might be just fighting away just to get back to maintenance or even just below. Now, if you're someone that incurs more muscle damage per set, then theoretically with this sort of dip down here, you're going to dip down there a lot quicker in a lot less time, so you should get out of the gym sooner so you can start that recovery process and grow. With the damage response, basically if there's any reasons why you would have more inflammation than the regular individual, less processes that can be directed towards the adaptation versus just maintaining health or whatever reason the inflammatory thing's there, whether it's an allergic response, blah, 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 that's going to affect how much volume you can handle. The next thing is something I've neglected, but shout out to people at Muscle Nerds that have really tackled this one quite well, is aerobic capacity. So the greater aerobic capacity you have, the better volume you can actually recover from. This actually both applies to in sets, like even things such as like the creatine replenishment in sort of your ATP-PC system is dictated by actually aerobic capacity measures. How much volume you can handle, how much like basically glucose can get in the cell, all these side effect things actually flows off to a few things out there and sort of helps the overall system recover from more. Another thing, health markers. This sort of ties up to that inflammatory point I mentioned before. Your body's first like point of basically its highest priority is to survive. It's not necessarily make you jacked. So you want to make sure that all your recovery measures are directed towards, let's say growth, etc., or most of them, or basically get that equation better fit looking for you. If all your sort of recovery processes, your food, your sleep, it's just getting you back to maintenance because your health is shit, then suddenly the room for adaptation disappears. The resources for adaptation lowers again. So you want to get those things in line, and then from there, it's a lot easier to get progress. Your minimum effective dose goes down. Your maximum recoverable volume goes up. The link between stimulus and adaptation goes up. You can handle more volume. Frequency, sort of ticked off that one. This one, I guess, definitely applies for more of your Gen Pop people. There might be some psychological adherence reasons for different personality types, something that Fabio talks a bit about in terms of what people enjoy. This may relate to like, dopamine chasers, like liking less volume, etc. Whatever your adherence caters to. So let's say you're someone who likes to chase a pump, maybe higher volume might be the way to go. Let's say you're someone who enjoys training really hard or really heavy, maybe lower volume end of the spectrum is the way for you to go. Another thing is how you count it. So quick reference again to that really high volume study. They measured arm growth in this study. So with all those things, they measured their bicep growth as like the highest in 30 to 45 sets via counting things such as rows, like chin-ups, pull-downs, etc. It is commonplace for the average person not to actually count those. So if you count it, then technically you can do more. Maybe count these as a sort of half measures, something to consider, but not like equate to a full set. You can sort of gauge that through damage, pump, etc. To actually know if you should be counting these sets of secondary muscles towards your workout. So all these factors are going to dictate towards how much of in the spectrum you are of a lower volume person and pretty much to a higher volume as well. And to be honest, a lot of these things are actually going to be in line with frequency as well. I mentioned this a few times. Overload fits more in the category of frequency and undulation than does volume and intensity. So basically this is volume talk, but it could also be just an overload talk in general. It almost just talks about what factors affect overload and how that affects volume, etc. So before you just jump into next program, before you've just ridden 3 sets of 10 across the board, or 4 sets of 5 or 5x5, whatever it is, consider these things. Consider where you're going for the next few phases and how the fatigue sensitivity is going to affect you there. Look into the life stress. Look into how strong they are. Look into sort of their response to things. Look into their health, and you might actually get a better idea here. Right, this is Conor from Force Intelligence, and I hope this is a good video. Share it around, and again, answer that question for me that I had before midway through the video. Thanks guys, enjoy.